The lion dragged her into town and they gasped when they learned she was the sheriff's daughter. The small town of Red Creek, lost in the dust and heat of the Arizona wilderness, was just a dot on the map, but for its inhabitants, it was a whole world. And in this world, where the law was fragile and justice sharp, the main figure was Sheriff James Harper, a man of a harsh temper, with a wrinkled face tanned by the wines, and eyes in which the cold fire of duty burned. Everyone respected him, and many feared him, because he had no ceremony with bandits and lawbreakers. He was a man of his word and order, and his reputation was impeccable. But no one knew that in his life, there was one small weakness: his daughter, Evelyn. Evelyn was the complete opposite of her father, gentle, fragile, with a shock of golden hair, always hiding from the sun under a wide hat. Her beauty was as ethereal as her character. She dreamed of a beautiful world, of books, of music, of something that would be so far from the cruel and dusty Red Creek. She was the sheriff's only daughter, and he, having no wife, adored his child, protecting her from all dangers. One day, as the sun was just beginning to rise, Evelyn went for a walk in the canyon to admire the first rays. It was her favorite place, where she felt free from the suffocating atmosphere of the town. She knew her father didn't approve of her walks so far from home, but she always believed that no one would harm her, that the wild nature would protect her. She was walking along a narrow path when she suddenly heard a growl, a low, guttural sound that made her blood freeze in her veins. Evelyn turned around and saw a huge lion standing on a cliff, looking at her with its yellow, hungry eyes. This was no ordinary lion, but a real African lion, the kind not found in these lands. She tried to run away, but her foot got tangled in roots, and she fell. The lion approached her slowly, not growling, but just looking into her eyes as if studying her. She closed her eyes, expecting death, but instead, she felt a huge paw rest on her chest, and then the lion, grabbing her by her dress, dragged her through the sand. She didn't scream, because fear had constricted her throat. She only felt her body being scraped by rocks and branches. The lion dragged her towards the town. There were several old, healing scars on its paw, and the fur on its chest was slightly burned. Evelyn lay on the ground, her dress torn, with thin streams of blood running down her face and hands. She was in shock, but remained conscious, looking at the lion that dragged her like a rag doll along the road to town. It was not aggressive. It did not try to harm her. It just dragged her. When the lion with Evelyn in tow appeared on the main street of Red Creek, the town froze. Men who were sitting in the saloon out into the street. Women froze on the porch. Children stopped in the middle of the road. Sheriff Harper, who was standing on the threshold of his office, was petrified. He saw this scene, and his heart stopped for a second. His daughter, she was being dragged by a wild beast. Anger boiled up in him, and he reached for his holster. But something stopped him. The lion was not aggressive. It didn't growl. It didn't try to attack. It just stopped in the middle of the street, released Evelyn, and stood next to her, as if protecting her. The townsfolk, not believing their eyes, began to come out of their homes. Sheriff Harper, recovering from the initial shock, rushed to his daughter. He lifted her into his arms, hugged her, and checked if she was okay. She was alive, and that was the main thing. But her dress was torn. There were scratches on her face and body, and she herself was in deep shock. The sheriff, holding her in his arms, turned to the crowd. People stood and looked at him, then at the lion. No one dared to move. "What kind of beast is that?" Someone whispered. "It's an African lion. Where did it come from?" Another exclaimed. But the most important question was, why didn't it kill her? Why did it drag her to town? Evelyn, trembling with cold, quietly whispered, "Papa, he didn't mean any harm." Sheriff Harper raised his head and looked at the lion. The beast stood calmly, looking at him with its intelligent eyes. It was not wild. It seemed domesticated. That was the shock. The sheriff ordered his men to step back, but not to shoot. He felt that there was something behind this, something he needed to find out. At that very moment, an old man named Ben came out of the crowd. He was the oldest resident of the town, and his word carried weight. He approached the sheriff and whispered, "James, I knew this lion. His name is Leo. He's not an ordinary beast. I saw him when I was young. He belonged to a man who was a trainer, but that man died." "Who was this man?" the sheriff asked, not taking his eyes off the beast. "He was your father," the old man whispered. These words pierced the sheriff. His father had died many years ago, but he had never told him about his past. And now, in the middle of the town, a lion that belonged to his father appeared and dragged his daughter to him. The plot began to thicken. What happened to his father? Why did he never talk about it? And why did this lion, so many years later, return? And what, on earth, did he want to show by dragging his daughter to him? This was the beginning of something that would turn his entire life and the life of the town upside down. Sheriff Harper, holding Evelyn in his arms, looked at the lion and at the old man who had revealed this secret. His father, whom he considered a simple farmer, was a trainer of wild beasts. It was unimaginable. He looked at the lion, and now there was no anger in his eyes, but only intrigue. And then he heard a loud, piercing scream. A woman standing on the threshold of her house fainted. People began to whisper, and then the whisper turned into a murmur, and the murmur into an outright scream. On Evelyn's face, which the sheriff was holding in his arms, on her cheek, there was not just a scratch, but a tattoo, small but distinct, as if a brand, etched by a predator. A tattoo in the shape of a lion's claw. Part 2. The beast's mark. Sheriff James Harper, holding his daughter in his arms, felt the world around him narrow to a single point. Not the lion, not old Ben, but the small, barely noticeable scar on Evelyn's cheek. It was not just a brand, it was a symbol he had only seen once, many years ago, in his father's old papers. He had never given them any thought, considering them to be children's drawings. And now this symbol was on the face of his daughter, whom a wild beast had just dragged into town. And she was alive. The sheriff set Evelyn on her feet, and she, swaying, leaned on him. Her eyes were empty, full of the horror she had experienced, but she held on. He took her hand and led her to his house, ignoring the hum of the crowd, which was now looking not at the lion, but at him. There was neither rage nor fear on his face, but only a frosty calm that hid a storm. Inside the house, in the silence and semi-darkness, he sat his daughter on the couch and sat next to her. He carefully, with his fingertips, traced the mark on her cheek. "Evelyn, what is this?" His voice was quiet, but steel rang in it. "I don't know, Papa." She raised her tear-filled eyes to him. "When I fell, the lion just put its paw on me, and when I opened my eyes, I felt a burning sensation, and I saw its claw. It was hot. It left this mark." "Why?" the sheriff whispered. He couldn't understand what was happening. Why did the lion, instead of killing her, leave some kind of symbol on his daughter's face? Did it want to say something? At that moment, there was a knock on the door. It was old Ben. "James, I have to talk to you," the old man said as he entered the room. He looked at Evelyn, and his eyes seemed to widen in shock. "Oh my God, the mark!" Sheriff Harper raised his head, and now his gaze was fixed on Ben. "What do you know, Ben? What is this mark?" "Who was my father?" Ben sighed. His shoulders slumped as if he were carrying the weight of the world's secrets. "Your father, James. He wasn't a farmer. He was a trainer, yes, but not a simple one. He was a member of an ancient clan called the Lion Claws. They believed that wild beasts are not just animals, but guides, messengers, and they would leave a mark on their children and their animals, so they would always remember who they are. It's a sign of strength, a sign of belonging. Your father was the last of them, or at least that's what everyone thought." Ben's words crashed down on the sheriff like an avalanche. His father, whom he considered an ordinary man, was part of some secret clan. It was completely unthinkable. He remembered how, as a child, his father had always seemed so distant, as if he lived in another world. Now he understood that this was indeed the case. But why? Why did he never tell me? And why did this lion come back? And why did it do this to Evelyn? Questions poured out of him, bullets from a revolver. Your father didn't tell you because he was afraid, Ben replied. His clan was destroyed. Another clan, the Wolf Fangs, hunted them down, considering them sorcerers and heretics. They killed everyone they could find. Your father escaped, and he thought he was the only one left alive. He left his old life behind. But it seems not everything is so simple. Wolf Fangs, the sheriff whispered. This name was also familiar to him from the old papers. Now everything took on a sinister meaning. The lion, the mark, the return. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a sign that the old feud had returned. He went out onto the porch. The town was still in shock, and the lion stood in the middle of the street as if waiting for something. The sheriff realized that the lion had dragged Evelyn into town to harm her, but to warn him. It was a message, and he had to decipher it. Sheriff Harper approached the lion, slowly, without a weapon. The lion looked at him and, lowering its head as if paying homage, lay down on the ground. I understand, the sheriff whispered. You're not an enemy. You're an ally. At that moment, a young man jumped out of the crowd. He had a pale, angry face and eyes full of hatred. He was dressed in black clothes and had an amulet in the shape of a wolf's fang hanging from his neck. It's a lie. This beast is a devil, he screamed. He killed my parents when I was a child, and he must pay. He pulled a knife from his belt and rushed at the lion. But the lion, which had been so calm just a moment ago, stood in a fighting stance, roaring. Its roar was not just a sound, but a vibration that pierced all present. The sheriff, seeing that he was not paying attention, grabbed the young man and threw him aside. Who are you? He asked. My name is Jacob. I'm the last of the Wolf Fangs clan. My ancestors were killed by these lion sorcerers, and this beast is the last reminder of them. I came here to take revenge, Jacob said, getting up. His eyes burned with madness, and he tried to attack the lion again, but Sheriff Harper stopped him. Calm down. This lion didn't do anything to you. I know about your clan. I know what they did to my father, the sheriff shouted, but Jacob didn't listen. He killed them. The lion, Jacob yelled, and at that moment, at the peak of his rage, he pulled a revolver from his belt and fired. The bullet, whistling through the air, hit Evelyn, who had run out of the house to see what was happening. She just wanted to see the lion, but she was in the line of fire. Blood gushed from her shoulder, and she, screaming in pain, fell to the ground. The sheriff's anger, which had been held back until this moment, exploded. He, without a second thought, rushed at Jacob. He hit him in the face, on the body, until he fell to the ground, unable to resist. Sheriff Harper snatched the revolver from him and threw it away. Now everyone was looking at Evelyn, lying on the ground. She was wounded. For the first time in his life, Sheriff Harper felt that he was powerless. He, a man who was always ready for any danger, could not protect his daughter. And now, as she lay on the ground, bleeding, he felt only one thing: rage. Rage at himself, at Jacob, at this whole damned world that gave him no peace. The climax we were heading towards had arrived. The shock of what they saw and the sheriff's rage hit the audience. Now he was ready for anything to take revenge and restore justice. He looked at the lion. The lion, which had always been so calm, was now in a fury. It roared, and its roar was so loud that the ground trembled. It was a cry of rage, a cry of pain. The lion, which was supposed to be a symbol of strength, was now wounded, just like Evelyn. Sheriff Harper picked up Evelyn. Her skin was pale, and a smile played on her lips. Papa, she whispered, he's protecting us. And at that moment, Sheriff Harper understood. The lion didn't drag Evelyn because it wanted to show the mark. It dragged her to show him that someone was hunting their kind. Someone who knows about this mark. It was wounded because it was protecting someone. Now Sheriff Harper was not just a sheriff. He was the heir to the Lion Claws clan, and he was ready to fight the Wolf Fangs clan to protect his daughter and restore justice. But he didn't know that this battle was just the beginning. Part 3. Hunting the Predators. Sheriff Harper's rage was not loud or demonstrative. It was cold and sharp, like the steel of his revolver. He carried the bleeding Evelyn into his house, and the lion, Leo, followed him like a loyal dog. Its huge shadow fell on the cracked wooden porch, and the townspeople stepped aside, giving it way. The crowd, which just a minute ago had been gripped by shock and whispers, now retreated in fear. They saw how their sheriff had changed. He was no longer just a keeper of the peace. He had become someone else, dangerous and unpredictable, like the wild nature in which he now found his ally. Jacob, who had tried to escape, was caught by the sheriff's deputy, Mr. Graham, and tied to a post in the central square. His eyes burned with hatred, but the fear in them was much stronger. He realized he had underestimated his enemy. In the house, Sheriff Harper carefully laid Evelyn on the bed, which was immediately stained with her blood. The wound on her shoulder was deep, but fortunately not fatal. The sheriff, whose hands were so strong and reliable, now trembled. He was not a doctor, but he knew how to stop the bleeding. He took off his shirt, tore it into pieces to make a bandage, and bandaged the wound. He acted quickly and decisively, but his heart was pounding in his chest. He couldn't understand how this had happened. He had promised himself that he would never let anything like this happen. And here she was, his little girl, wounded because of him. I wanted to. Evelyn tried to say something, but the sheriff stopped her. Don't say anything, Evier. Sleep, rest. You're safe. I'll take care of everything. The sheriff went out onto the porch. The lion sat by the door, its eyes fixed on Jacob. It didn't growl, but its gaze was full of cold fury. It was waiting. The sheriff turned to Graham. Graham, I have to go. Find Dr. Hart. He lives on the other side of town, to come and examine Evelyn. And watch over the town. Don't let anyone near that man. I'll deal with him myself. James, what are you going to do? Graham asked, his voice filled with alarm. I'm going hunting, the sheriff said, and a dangerous glint shone in his eyes. Hunting the wolf fangs. He turned to the lion, and Leo, as if understanding his words, stood up. It walked ahead of the sheriff, its huge paws silently treading the dusty road. Sheriff Harper, with a revolver in his hand, followed it. He didn't know where they were going, but he trusted the lion. Leo was his guide, a part of him, his legacy. They walked through the desert for several hours until they reached an abandoned ranch. It was an old, dilapidated place that seemed to have been deserted decades ago. But Sheriff Harper knew that wasn't the case. He saw hoofprints, fresh tracks leading to the ranch, and he smelled a scent that, it seemed to him, he had known since childhood. The scent of the wolf fangs. The lion stopped without going inside. It sat down, as if saying, "The rest is up to you." And the sheriff understood. He had to enter this place alone. He had to face his past. He slowly entered the house, his hand on the handle of his revolver. He felt the tension rising. He heard every rustle, every creak. The house was empty, but he knew someone had been there, and he knew he was alone. He entered the living room, and his heart stopped for a second. On the wall hung a photograph of his father. He stood next to his wife, who held little James in her arms. But that wasn't the main thing. On the table, under the photograph, lay an old book. He approached it, took it in his hands, and opened it. It was his father's diary. He began to read, and each page was a revelation to him. He learned about the Lion Claws clan, their philosophy, and that they were not just trainers, but protectors of nature. And he learned about the Wolf Fangs clan. They were not just bandits, they were hunters of beasts and people. They believed that all the power of nature belonged to them, and they were ready to kill anyone who stood in their way. And they hunted the Lion Claws clan because they were their main enemies. And he understood that his father, who was so strong, had tried so hard to protect him because he knew that sooner or later they would come for him. He knew that the past doesn't let go, and he left this diary for him as a guide to action. Sheriff Harper turned the page. He saw the last entry. His father wrote that he had to go to town, that he had to find his son, but he didn't make it. On the next page, there was only blood. A lot of blood, and then the sheriff heard a rustle. He turned and saw a man standing in the doorway. A young man. There were 2 others with him. All 3 were dressed in black, and amulets in the shape of wolf fangs hung from their necks. James Harper, one of them said, his voice cold and mocking. "We've been waiting for you." Sheriff Harper didn't answer. He just raised his revolver. He didn't want a war. He just wanted to be left alone. But he understood that it was impossible. He was his father's heir, and he had to see this through. "Did you think we forgot? Did you think you could hide from us? We've been hunting you all your life, and now we've found you, and we'll find your daughter. She must be punished too," said another. The sheriff's heart clenched. Now he was overcome with fear. Fear not for himself. Fear for Evelyn. She was in town, alone, with a wound, and he had left her. He had made a mistake. A huge mistake. And now he had to pay for it. He had to protect her, and he couldn't do it, because he was here. At that moment, the lion, Leo, appeared on the threshold. It stood, as if saying, "You are not alone." And the sheriff knew it was right. Part 4. Acceptance and Rebirth. Sheriff Harper, standing in the middle of the dusty, abandoned house, looked into the eyes of his enemies. The fear for Evelyn was strong, but it was not the only feeling. Next to him stood Leo, his loyal, wild ally, and the sheriff felt the same rage, the same anger in him, and that gave him strength. "You're wrong, boys," the sheriff said, and his voice was as hard as stone. "You thought I was just a sheriff, but I am my father's son, and I won't let you harm my family." He fired a shot, not at them, but at the ceiling. The loud sound, echoing off the walls, made them flinch. "Last chance, get out, or I'll send you all to hell." One of them, the tallest, smirked. "You think you can do something alone? There are many of us, Harper. We've been hunting you for years." And then Leo appeared. It didn't growl. It didn't attack. It just stood there, and its gaze was full of power. It looked at them as if saying, "You can't win." And they felt it. They were hunters, but now they had become the hunted. They knew they had no chance against a wild beast and a man who was ready for anything for his daughter. They retreated, disappearing into the twilight like shadows. They understood that they could not win today, but they would be back. Sheriff Harper and Leo returned to town. Evelyn was sleeping. Her wound had been bandaged by the doctor Graham had found. The sheriff sat down next to her, and his heart was filled with acceptance. He accepted his fate. He accepted that he was not just a sheriff, but his father's heir, and he realized that his life would never be the same again. A few days later, Evelyn was on the mend. She was no longer afraid of the lion. She knew he was her friend. He came to her every day, and they sat together, watching the sunset. Sheriff Harper, who at first couldn't believe it, now looked at them with pride. He realized that his daughter was not just a fragile girl. She was strong, just like her father, and she was not afraid of the wild. Jacob, who had been arrested, told them everything. He told them that the Wolf Fangs clan had been hunting their family for many years. He told them that they wanted to get an ancient artifact that they believed belonged to the Lion Claws clan. But this artifact was not just an object. It was a power that could bring chaos to the world. And this power was with the sheriff's father, who had hidden it so that no one could find it. Sheriff Harper, who had always been a man of the law, now understood that there are things that cannot be solved with the law. He had to protect his daughter, and he was ready for it. Conclusion: the story of Sheriff Harper and his daughter Evelyn is not just a story about the Wild West. It is a story about how the past can catch up with us at the most unexpected moments. How things we think are forgotten can come back and change our lives. But it is also a story about acceptance. The acceptance of one's fate, one's legacy, one's strength. In the modern world, many of us try to run away from our past. We try to forget mistakes, traumas, and resentments, but they always stay with us, like a shadow that follows us. And until we accept them, they will haunt us. Like Sheriff Harper, we must learn to embrace our past, not run from it. Because only then can we become truly free. And only then can we protect those we love. As the old wisdom says, you cannot build a future if you don't know what it stands on. And it always stands on the foundation of our past.